At 2:14 UTC, Dr. Eliana Moritz, at the Cerro Tololo Observatory, froze in mid-sip of cold coffee. Her array's deep sky images were wrong, not blurred, not corrupted. Missing. Entire constellations. Gone. At first, she thought a software error had cropped the feed. Then the live telescope view confirmed it. Vast, shifting shadows crawling across the heavens. 2 minutes later, the International Space Surveillance Network lit up with urgent pings. Calls from amateur skywatchers flooded emergency lines. The stars are disappearing at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. An orbital technician stepped out onto the maintenance gantry of a communications satellite hub for a cigarette break. He lit the match, drew in a breath, and stopped breathing altogether. The moonlight should have bathed him in silver. Instead, a curtain of black metal was sliding across it, blotting out its glow. No thruster flare, no comms chatter, no warning. The fleet had arrived in silence. High above, the Zur Dominion's warships eclipsed the night. Their hulls were pitch black, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. Their shapes impossible to fully trace, like chunks of the void carved free and set drifting. Behind them trailed escorts, smaller, but bristling with weapon emplacements, that gleamed faintly under the scattered light of distant stars. On the Zur flagship, Vrathic's Fist, Supreme Strategist Exorin studied the blue-green orb below. His second-in-command clicked their mandibles in quiet amusement. Primitive, divided, unprepared. It will be over in a single planetary cycle. They had made this assessment before arriving, of course. Earth's weapons were considered archaic, its species fractured by borders and rivalries, its fleets laughably small. The Zur were conquerors of 100 worlds, and none had taken more than days to fall. Earth was just another name to add to the ledger, and yet some in the fleet remembered the old stories. Myths of a human skirmish centuries past, when the Zir's far-flung scouts had failed to return. Official records dismissed those rumors as rebel propaganda. The strategists laughed when they were mentioned. Ghost tales, he had called them. On Earth, most slept through the first hour of invasion. In a London penthouse, a billionaire dreamt of markets opening in the morning. In Nairobi, a night shift nurse stitched up a knife wound without glancing at the newsfeed scrolling beside her. In the Aleutian Islands, fishermen on the cold black water noticed the moon fading and thought it a trick of clouds. At 3:06 UTC, military radar installations on 3 continents began picking up what they called mass occlusion events. Operators watched as entire sectors of the sky vanished behind incoming signatures. And still, there was no message, no ultimatum, no boast. The Zur did not negotiate with prey. By the time the first global alert reached civilian networks, the Dominion fleet had locked its orbits. Dozens of massive troop carriers hung just beyond the atmosphere, each capable of disgorging thousands of soldiers. Attack craft darted between them like wasps, their plasma lances already charged. For the Zur, this was the easy part, breaking the spine before the prey realized it was under attack. They had done it so many times before. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the way humanity's silence in those early minutes wasn't confusion, it was calculation. In bunkers buried miles deep, generals were already speaking in clipped cold voices. Initiate contingency Rook. All tungsten payloads to launch readiness. Seal civilian evacuation zones. They won't breach before the first strike. Above, the Zur believed they had taken the first move. In truth, they had just stepped into a game humanity had been preparing for since the day we first pointed a telescope at Mars and wondered what would happen if something looked back. The invasion began at dawn, at 5:42 UTC. The horizon over the North Atlantic shimmered not with sunrise, but with re-entry flames. Dozens of bright streaks carved across the sky, leaving long tails of orange that bled into the blue. To anyone not yet aware of the threat, it looked like a spectacular meteor shower. Children in coastal towns pointed and laughed. Couples took pictures. Then the streaks started shooting back. From Earth's upper atmosphere, the Zir's spearhead fleet dove toward low orbit, weapons spitting blinding pulses of plasma into defensive satellites and orbital platforms. Earth's communications grid buckled under the sudden loss of dozens of relay stations. On board Vrathic's Fist, strategist Axaronin watched the display with idle satisfaction. The first strikes always told the same story: chaos on the ground, panic in the air. Humans were slow by nature. They would not react in time. They didn't notice the launch signatures. In a Colorado mountain bunker, General Marcus Keller stood with his hands clasped behind his back as the countdowns hit 0. Above him, in the thin air over the Great Plains, 20 kinetic launch systems fired in sequence. Tungsten rods 20 feet long, dense as sin shot skyward at orbital velocity, vanishing from view before the sound of their departure reached the ground. They were not explosives. They didn't need to be. At 7 miles per second, mass alone was a weapon. A Zur destroyer in low orbit caught the first strike dead center. There was no warning, just a sudden white flare as the rod punched through its armored midsection, and kept going. The impact vaporized decks, shattered power conduits, and split the vessel open like a ripe fruit. The strategist's command display flashed red. One of the Dominion's elite ships was gone, and for the first time since entering Earth's orbit, he leaned forward in his command seat. Status: unknown. Strategist. The words cut off in a shriek of static as a second rod tore into another destroyer, in rapid succession. 9 Zur ships fell, their wreckage tumbling into the atmosphere. From the ground, the destruction looked like a second sunrise. Great sheets of molten metal raining toward the ocean. The Zur adjusted tactics, pulling their ships higher to avoid the kill zone. That was when the second wave of human defenses activated. Hidden among decommissioned weather satellites were retrofitted missile pods, each loaded with hypervelocity projectiles. They detonated in carefully calculated bursts, not to destroy, but to scatter lethal clouds of tungsten pellets across the Zir's orbital paths. The alien shields were designed for concentrated beams and warheads, not for millions of tiny, high-velocity slugs tearing through armor like paper. A Zur frigate staggered in space, its shields collapsing as its port side turned into a jagged, sparking ruin. 2 more followed, crippled beyond recovery. On the ground, civilians who had been screaming minutes earlier now stood frozen, watching flaming debris arc across the sky and fall toward the sea. Some cheered, others simply stared, realizing that Earth's defenders had struck back before the first alien troop had even landed. Inside Vrathic's Fist, strategist Axaronin's mandibles clicked in irritation. He had underestimated the prey's orbital defenses. Not catastrophic hit, but the casualty rate was unacceptable. Adapt, he growled. Push the landing craft through. We will finish this on the ground. He didn't notice the human listening posts, recording every one of his fleet's emergency transmissions. He didn't know that every troop carrier he sent down was already being tracked, and he certainly didn't know that Earth's defenders had only fired the opening volley. The Zur came to the surface, expecting surrender. Their troop carriers punched through the upper atmosphere like falling comets, bellies glowing from re-entry heat. The largest of them could carry 2,000 soldiers and half a dozen armored walkers, each walker capable of grinding a city block to rubble in minutes. On Vrathic's Fist, strategist Axaronin imagined human crowds kneeling in terror as the first waves descended. That was how it had been on 100 worlds before this one. But when the first carrier landed outside Chicago, there was no one there. The Zur disembarked into silence. Wide streets yawned empty. Storefronts gaped like broken teeth. Doors hung open on rusted hinges, swaying gently in the wind. The landing commander, unnerved, ordered his troops forward. Walkers stomped down cracked asphalt, their plasma cannons scanning for targets. Troopers checked their HUDs, Life signs were scarce, and then the bridge collapsed. It didn't crumble, it was cut. Explosives wired into the support structure blew, simultaneously, sending the lead walker plunging into the river below. Before the Zur could react, the rooftops around them erupted with gunfire. Not plasma, not directed energy, solid metal projectiles, moving too fast for shields to disperse. The Zur reeled as soldiers in urban camo moved like wraiths, vanishing into alleys before return fire could find them. The city's silence was gone now, replaced by the echo of controlled detonations, short bursts of rifle fire, and the groaning collapse of rigged structures in Rio de Janeiro. Another Zur landing team found the favelas empty. Their scanners picked up faint human heat signatures, but always just ahead, always slipping away. When the Zur advanced, the hillside exploded in a chain of preset charges, tearing a quarter of the settlement away in a cascade of dust and flame. In rural France, Zur walkers rolled through farmlands, their massive feet flattening wheat fields. They didn't notice the soil was soft and naturally soft until the lead walker sank waist deep into the ground. Beneath, an old irrigation tunnel had been widened and reinforced into a trap. From the hidden embankments beyond, anti-armor rounds slammed into its exposed underbelly. Everywhere they landed, the pattern was the same: empty streets, false retreats, ambushes from angles the Zur had never faced before. In a subterranean command room beneath Kyoto, Colonel Sato spoke into a calm, clipped radio. "Let them think we are running. Then close the jaws." And the jaws closed. Satellite uplinks relayed targeting data to mobile artillery units hidden in forests and mountains. Sniper teams and abandoned skyscrapers picked off Zur officers mid-command. Mines disguised as sewer covers tore through walkers. Even the sewers themselves became weapons troops, emerging from hidden hatches behind Zur positions, striking then, vanishing underground before counterfire could be ordered. The strategist's war map lit up with flashing red icons. Entire landing teams were going dark within minutes of deployment. "What is happening down there?" Exoran demanded. His ground commanders struggled to explain. The prey refused to fight where expected. They melted away, reappeared in force, and struck with lethal precision. From their perspective, it made no sense. In Zur warfare, the enemy always defended fixed-point cities, command posts, sacred sites. Humanity did the opposite. They abandoned ground willingly, forcing the Zur into unfamiliar terrain, and then cutting them apart piece by piece. The Zur had teeth of plasma and steel. They didn't realize Earth had teeth of its own, hidden, sharpened, and waiting. From orbit, Earth looked calm. The Zur couldn't see the trap tightening. At 11:22 UTC, strategist Axoraran stood before the holomap aboard Vrathic's fist. The surface campaign was stalling humans, refusing to meet his troops in open battle, striking from hidden positions, bleeding his forces in a war of shadows. His solution was simple: crush them from above. "Bring the fleet lower," he ordered. "We burned their nests from the sky." It was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. Hidden in the black void beyond lunar orbit, the UNSF Indomitable intercepted the Zir's fleet maneuver orders. Admiral Reese, voice calm but eyes hard, sent a single coded message to every human vessel and orbital defense platform still in the fight. Phase 2. Pull the net. The Zur began their descent. Massive warships drifting into the upper atmosphere, where their plasma cannons could fire directly on human strongholds. They thought they were closing in for the kill, but in low orbit, physics plays favorites. As the Zur fleet entered the drag zone where Earth's thin atmosphere began to gnaw at their velocity, the humans struck from camouflaged platforms in geosynchronous orbit. A dozen gravitic hooks activated. These experimental devices generated localized distortions in the planet's gravity field, subtly tugging at any ship that entered their range. On their own, they couldn't rip a vessel from the sky, but, when combined with the already thickening drag of atmosphere, they acted like invisible snares. The first Zur cruiser slowed by only 2%. Its helmsman compensated without thought. Then another fraction of a percent, then another. By the time alarms blared, the ship's descent rate had shifted just enough to ruin its firing solutions and lock it into a shallow orbital dive it couldn't escape. That's when the second part of the trap sprung. Human interceptors, sleek, knife-shaped craft designed for rapid atmospheric re-entry rose from the clouds, trailing contrails of vapor. They darted between the lumbering Zur ships, releasing concentrated bursts of tungsten slugs and missile salvos into exposed thrusters. The slowed ships couldn't dodge. A Zur dreadnought, the Vorak Claw, took 3 direct hits to its starboard engine banks. The resulting chain reaction lit the sky over the Indian Ocean like a sunrise. Flaming debris streaked downward, scattering across the waves. On Vrathic's fist, Axeron's mandibles clicked in fury as 2 more ships were caught in the gravitic snare, dragged lower into denser air, where heat bloom from re-entry began to scorch their armor plating. In Zur space warfare doctrine, ships never lingered. Here it was suicide. But this wasn't Zur doctrine. The clouds tore open with streaks of plasma. Massive alien warships, once untouchable, now glowed orange as friction ripped at their hulls. And cutting through the chaos came the human fighters, small, fast, merciless like sharks sensing blood in the water. On board the Indomitable, Admiral Reese watched another Zur cruiser spiral helplessly into the atmosphere. "Don't waste ammo," she told her gunnery crews. "Gravity's doing most of the work." By 14 o'clock UTC, 7 Zur capital ships had been destroyed, 3 more crippled beyond repair. The survivors clawed their way back into higher orbit, their formation ragged and their confidence shaken. The Zur had come, believing orbital supremacy was theirs by default. They had not imagined that a species bound to its planet could turn that very planet into a weapon. The Zur had lost ships. They had lost momentum. Now, they decided to make humanity lose hope. It began with the farmlands at 6:13 UTC. Over the Great Plains, a Zur strike cruiser descended low enough to skim the atmosphere. It didn't fire at military targets. It turned its plasma lances on endless rows of wheat and corn, igniting them in an instant. The firestorm spread for miles in minutes, the smoke columns so massive they could be seen from orbit. By noon, similar raids were hitting rice terraces in Southeast Asia, vineyards in France, cattle ranges in Brazil. Anything that could feed a planet was set ablaze. The intent was clear: starve the humans into surrender. On Vrathic's fist, strategist X paced before the tactical display. If they hunger, they break. If they break, they kneel. But Earth didn't kneel. It clenched its fists in a dim hangar beneath the Norwegian fjords. A voice spoke over the coms to a row of pilots strapping into sleek, matte black craft. "This isn't about holding the line anymore," Commander Hayes said. "This is about ending their supply chain. All of it." The black craft were Spectre's deep space stealth strike ships. They weren't built for dogfights. They were built for disappearing into the dark and making sure whatever they found there never came back. The first Spectre kill was silent. A Zur cargo hauler 1/2 kilometer long, loaded with food rations for their ground troops, was gliding through the shadow of a dead moon when a magnetic mine latched onto its spine. No one aboard even saw it. The detonation peeled the ship's hull open like foil, venting atmosphere and cargo into the void. The fragments tumbled away in slow, glittering arcs. The second kill was messier. 2 Spectres approached, a heavily guarded Zur resupply vessel under the cover of its own sensor blind spot. Using microbursts of thrust, they matched the ship's drift until they were practically riding its hull. Then they fired 6 tungsten penetrators straight into the fuel cells. The explosion was so massive, the debris field remained visible on long-range scanners for hours. In less than 36 hours, 10 Zur supply ships were destroyed. The Dominion's ground forces began rationing their own rations. Soldiers who were used to commanding feasts after victories now gnawed on nutrient paste designed for prison colonies. Morale plummeted, but the Zur weren't done with cruelty. On the outskirts of Nairobi, a Zur gunship targeted a refugee normed, clearly marked with relief symbols, and opened fire. The footage, captured by a drone, went global within minutes. It was a calculated move to break spirits. Instead, it lit a fuse. Within the hour, human resistance cells in 20 different occupied zones launched coordinated attacks. They didn't just hit soldiers. They hit the Zur, where it hurts fuel depots, ammo caches, forward operating bases, places that took years to build and seconds to destroy. From her hidden command center in Alaska, Admiral Reese received the damage reports and said only one thing: cruelty works both ways. On Vrathic's fist, strategist Xoran watched his supply lines disintegrate and his ground troops grow weaker with each passing day. The humans weren't collapsing under terror. They were sharpening their knives. The Zur fleet began to vanish, not in battle, not in retreat, just gone. It started with the Dravak, a destroyer patrolling the far side of Luna. 1 minute it was on the strategist's tactical display, sending regular status pings. The next, its signal blinked out as if it had never existed. No distress call, no debris field, no trace. Xoran assumed a sensor glitch. Then the Krothfang disappeared over the asteroid belt. Then a troop carrier over Europa. By the fourth loss in less than 8 hours. Silence had settled over the Zur bridge crew. They didn't know the humans had unleashed something new. From the dark between orbits came the Valkyrie wing-human stealth frigates, so black their hulls drank in starlight, armed with experimental gravitic mines that could tear a ship's core from its hull without so much as a flash. Their tactics were simple: slip into an enemy's blind spot, plant the mine, vanish. The explosion came minutes later, so far from the frigate's position that sensors never made the connection. The mines didn't just destroy, they erased. The Valkyrie wing hunted with surgical precision, targeting the Zir's outer patrols first. Without the eyes of their scouts, the Dominion fleet grew blind, forced to huddle closer together in tighter orbits, perfect, predictable pattern for hunters. Over Titan's methane seas, the Valkyrie frigate Shadowknife slid silently behind a Zur resupply ship. The crew moved without a word. A magnetic clamp extended, fastening a mine to the target's spine. Then they drifted away, on minimal thrusters, slow as shadows. 17 minutes later, the resupply ship folded in on itself like paper crushed by an invisible fist. No fire, no light, just implosion and silence. From the ground, human resistance. Fighters began noticing the change. In occupied zones, Zura air support grew slower to respond. Orbital bombardments became rarer. Supply drops stopped entirely in some regions. The strategist tried to adapt. He ordered tighter escort formations, overlapping fields of fire, constant sensor sweeps. But that only made his ships easier to track, and the humans were tracking them. From a deep space relay station hidden in the Kuiper Belt, Commander Hayes watched Zur, ship movements like a chess grandmaster, studying an opponent's dwindling options. "They're pulling closer together," she murmured. "Good. Easier to herd." On the 5th day of the Ghost Fleet campaign, the Valkyrie wings struck the heart of the Zir's orbital command. 3 mines went off within a 30-second window, annihilating the Dominion's communications hub and severing long-range command between their fleet and ground forces. Panic began to seep into Zur discipline. Officers barked contradictory orders. Troops on the ground acted without coordination. The Dominion had always fought as a unified machine. Now, its pieces were breaking apart. Inside Vrathic's fist, the strategist stared at the tactical display, mandibles twitching. "They are not fighting us," he said slowly. "They are hunting us, and somewhere in the black, unseen by Zur eyes." The Shadowknife crew smiled grimly as they slid into position behind their next target. The Zur had come to Earth believing they were the predators. Now they traveled through the void listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. The Zur had one fleet left, not scattered pickets, not isolated patrols. A single, massive spearhead of warships, 25 cruisers, 6 carriers, and the Vrathic's fist at its core. They believed that by clustering together, they could force humanity into a decisive engagement. One battle, one victory. They didn't realize they were sailing into a slaughterhouse. Admiral Reese had been waiting for this. For weeks, she and Commander Hayes had shaped the battlefield not with direct assaults, but with quiet, precise nudges. Every destroyed scout ship, every severed supply line, every feint drew the Zur inward toward one specific sector of space, the Oort Rift. The rift was a jagged scar in the outer Systema region of drifting asteroid fragments and dense dust clouds, invisible to the naked eye, but treacherous to navigate without updated charts. In its center sat a narrow corridor, the only safe path through the chaos. The Zur didn't know it, but humanity had mined every rock and hidden every gun they could along that path. From her hidden command deck, aboard the carrier Resolute, Reese watched the Zur fleet begin to enter the rift. "Let them think we're retreating," she told her crew. "They'll follow. They always follow." The trap began with silence. Human ships on the far side of the corridor powered down reactors and drifted among the rocks, their hulls camouflaged to match the cold shadows. The Zir's long-range sensors reported nothing unusual, just debris and dust. Then, the first detonations rippled through their vanguard. Mines disguised as tumbling asteroids ignited in synchronized bursts, shredding 2 cruisers before they could raise shields. The Zur surged forward, believing they could push through before the humans regrouped. That was when the asteroids began to move. Every rock larger than a shuttle was a hidden weapon: platform railguns, missile pods, gravitic pulse cannons. They turned as one, spitting fire into the Zur formation from all angles. The corridor became a blender. A carrier tried to deploy its fighter wings, but a gravitic pulse slammed its hangar doors shut, crushing half the squadron inside. Another ship attempted to retreat, only to collide with a cloaked mine that split its hull in 2. Inside Vrathic's fist, strategist Exorin gripped the command rail. The deck shuddered under each impact. "Break through," he roared. "Burn them from the sky." But every time a Zur ship advanced, human gunboats darted in from the shadows, striking engines and disappearing before a counterstrike could land. Then came the second phase. From behind the Zur formation, the Valkyrie wing emerged from the rift's dark wall, cutting off retreat. Now the enemy wasn't just trapped, they were surrounded. The crossfire grew unbearable. Plasma fire painted the corridor in flashes of green and white, illuminating twisted debris drifting among drifting bodies. The soundless void felt deafening in the minds of those who realized there was no escape. Exoranus comes filled with screams from his captains, the static-laced final words of proud warships before they went dark forever. His fleet was dying, not in glorious battle, but in an execution chamber designed by prey who had become predators. The last sight his sensors recorded before Vrathic's fist was hit: the cold, unblinking eyes of Admiral Reese on the Resolute's bridge, watching without mercy. The battle in the rift ended in silence. No Zur ships fled, no distress beacons escaped, no survivors drifted among the wreckage. The Oort Rift was now a graveyard, torn holes floating in the dust clouds, their jagged shadows twisting in the cold starlight. Admiral Reese stood on the Resolute's observation deck, staring at the debris field. Around her, crews moved with quiet efficiency, scavenging salvageable tech and stripping enemy corpses of anything that could identify them. The Zir's presence here would be erased, as if they had never come. In the outer system, humanity's Black Ops Command began executing Protocol Ashfall, the final stage of the campaign. Small, unmarked ships spread through every known Xur outpost in the solar system, planting demolition charges on captured supply depots and cum relays. At a synchronized moment, each was annihilated in controlled detonations, their remains sinking into the void without trace. From Mars's hidden tunnels to Titan's methane plains, human resistance fighters eliminated every stranded Xur soldier. No one was left to surrender. No one left to crawl back and tell the tale. On the rift's edge, the Valkyrie wing hunted the last escape pods. Each was intercepted, scanned, and vented into the void without ceremony. Commander Hayes's voice was cold over comms. No signals, no witnesses. It wasn't vengeance, it was calculation. Reese knew the truth. If even one Xur officer made it home, the Dominion would regroup. They would study humanity, adapt, and come again. But if the solar system became a place of whispers and uncertainty, an expanse where entire fleets simply vanished, fear would grow instead of resolve, and fear was the best defense humanity could ask for. Hours after the last Xur signature faded from scanners, Reese's fleet formed up for the return home. The surviving ships bore scars-burned hull plating, patched reactor cores, shattered gun batteries, but their crews stood tall when Earth's battered orbital stations came into view. Silent crowds watched the fleet glide past. No cheering, no celebrations, just the quiet recognition of a war fought in shadows. The knowledge that survival had been bought in blood, deep within the Xur Dominion's home territories. Silence stretched across the cum channels where the solar system fleet's regular reports once came. Weeks passed, then months. No word, no pings, no signals. The strategist's successors argued in council chambers. Was it worth sending another fleet? Some claimed the humans had hidden weapons that could erase entire armadas without warning. Others whispered darker tales that the humans themselves had become something unnatural. Predators in the dark. In time, the Dominion sealed all navigational routes to human space. No maps marked the Sol system anymore. Traders avoided it. Explorers shunned it. The graveyard sector and humanity. We rebuilt, quietly, patiently, watching the stars for the next fool who thought we were prey. Because when they came, there would be no survivors. Again.